Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning to those who are joining us. I will just wait a minute or so to see who comes into the room. Yep, we've got some participants rolling in already. Thank you very much for joining us on this chilly Saturday morning. It's certainly a perfect morning to be learning about winter energy efficiency. And I'll just leave it a few more seconds to let a few more people roll in. And I can chat about myself while we wait for that to happen. So thank you very much for joining us. Hello to everyone who's already here. Winter energy efficiency is a topic that is very close to my heart. You might notice that I have lots of woolly garments on this morning. I love low tech winter and energy efficiency and that like clothing. I'm a massive advocate for wool, and I wear it all winter. I wear it, I sit on it, I sleep on it. I particularly want it on my pulse points to keep the blood warm as it runs through my body. So I highly recommend that everyone get some wool on. Something else I've found this winter as well, I'm looking after a dog this winter, and I've found that the brisk walks that we do in the morning and in the evening have made a real difference to how I feel during the day as well. I find that really brisk walk in the evening means that I can have my heating on slightly lower in the evening. I can turn it down a degree, which I'm sure Dean, our presenter, will cover. Having your heating just 1 degree lower through the winter can actually make a really big difference to your heating bill. So that's been a discovery for me this winter on how to stay warmer. And I do notice it in the morning as well. When I sit down to work, if I've had that brisk walk, I feel more comfortable. I feel warmer as I sit down. So that said, I do love turning on the heat in the evenings. I'm not a martyr. I do absolutely love it when I can take off some layers, turn on the heat, and really just enjoy the comfort of a warm home in the evening. So welcome everyone here today. Welcome to the Winter Energy Efficiency webinar. As I said, and for those of you who just joined us, I'm Belinda Wiley. I'm Acting Team Leader of Sustainability at Hobsons Bay City Council. Welcome to the Winter Energy Efficiency episode of our season of webinars that will run throughout the year. I will start with an acknowledgement of country. I acknowledge the sovereignty of the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people on whose unceded lands I am working today. I acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. I also acknowledge the continuing sovereignty of all country and First Peoples of the unceded territories and waters across Australia. I, as a sustainability specialist, appreciate their ongoing care for country and their custodianship of our lands, waters and skies since time immemorial. Okay, let's dive into some housekeeping for the webinar here today. So the webinar is being recorded, please be aware of that. And I'll just chat through some of the functions of the webinar. So just take a look at the bottom of your screen. There'll be some icons down there, and I'll take you through what some of those icons mean. So the chat function is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. The chat function, it's called chat, it's the speech bubble. You can click on that icon when you want to use the chat. So the best way to use that is if you just want to chat, basically. However, if you have a question that you would like answered by Dean, our energy specialist, energy efficiency specialist today, please use the Q&A function, which is a little, it's also, in that same menu at the bottom of your screen, and it's on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So it says Q&A. You just click on the icon to open the window, you type in your question, and then you press enter. Another way you can use that is you can upvote questions by pressing the thumbs up icon, and that will actually push a question higher up in the Q&A list. So if you see that someone's asked something that you're particularly interested in having answered, if you give it a thumbs up, that will mean that it pushes it up and it will show that that's a question that people are particularly interested in hearing the answers to. There's also a raise hand icon along that bottom menu bar, and that will, if you press on the raise hand icon, that will tell our tech team who are sitting in the background waiting to help us, that will let them know that you require support and they will come in and help you. So just raise your hand if you have any tech issues throughout today. Okay, so I'll just like to introduce Dean Lombard, who is our energy efficiency expert for today's webinar. And I think Dean's coming on camera. Hi, Dean. So, hi, good morning. Dean is a former social worker and an energy specialist who's worked on issues such as energy efficiency, fuel choice, consumer protections, hardship assistance, and community energy projects. Dean's interested in helping people and communities take control of their energy needs and make the system work for them. So thank you very much, Dean. Welcome. And I will now turn off my video and my audio, and I'll let you take us away on the webinar.
Thanks, Belinda, and hi, everyone. It's so great that you've all come. I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people in West Footscray. I'll launch into the presentation pretty much straight away. We're trying to cover a bit of ground. I'll do my best to explain stuff well. I will inevitably explain one or two things not so well or overlook things. So please, if there's something that you want to know more than what I've said, throw it in the Q&A and we'll get to that at the end of the session. The Q&A is always a really interesting part of the session because anything that I'd never thought of turns up in the Q&A. So this enables some really good discussion. Anyway, I'll get started with the slides and we'll go from there. Okay. So everyone should be able to see the slide now. So what we're going to cover is, if I click on this little arrow, right. I'm going to cover these sort of 5 areas. The first one is just to talk a bit about how we use energy in the home because, the home is like, we use energy for lots of things in our home, and understanding how we use energy in our home really helps us to understand where we can make the most sort of savings through energy efficiency and what we can really do to maximize the value from our energy usage. It also demonstrates why we focus on a particular couple of areas when we talk about energy efficiency. And the first one of those, the second section, is the thermal performance of the actual house. The house is like your biggest appliance. It keeps heat in, and the way the house performs really affects everything about what energy you need to do to heat it and keep it comfortable. Then we'll talk specifically about heating, keeping warm, because that's always our biggest concern in winter. We'll talk a bit about hot water, because that's also a big form of energy use, and a bit more important in winter than in summer, because we really like to warm up in a shower or a bath or something. And then I'll go into a whole lot of other stuff, talking about the smaller but still effective types of energy usage that we have in the home. So to start with, the broad thing about how we use energy, this is this pie chart. The pie chart shows, it's like a pie. The circle is all the energy that you use, and then the sections show how much of that total you use for each of those different things. And this chart is actually, it's a few years old, so it's probably not quite accurate, but it's close enough. It's hard to get this information, so you've got to use what you can get. It's also the average for Australia, so things vary a bit in different climates, different areas of Australia where different types of appliances are used. It also varies according to the size of your household, the lifestyle that you have, so it's really just a rough average, but I think it's very indicative because it sort of shows that nearly half of our energy usage in the home is for either heating or cooling or both. So obviously in colder climates like Melbourne and Southern Victoria, that's more heating and not as much cooling. In warmer climates, it's a lot more cooling and hardly any heating, but the proportion remains actually remarkably similar around Australia. It's just the most important thing that we use energy for in the home. The next one is water heating, and this can vary a lot depending on the technology that you use to heat your water, but this is sort of an average. And that's almost, nearly a quarter of our energy usage for a lot of households. And then all the rest is all the other stuff. Lighting is probably now less than what it shows there because our lights are generally more efficient now than they were even a few years ago. Cooking is not that much. Refrigeration is quite a bit. And other appliances take up a big chunk. But as you can see, nothing really compares to heating and hot water heating. So that's why we talk about that most. If you've got a pool, that changes the whole thing, because pool pumps and filtration uses a lot of energy. And if you've got any particular stuff that you use that's less common, like, kilns or welding equipment, well, that can make a difference as well, depending on how much you use it. But yeah, this is sort of the average. And look, when we're thinking about how can we save money and energy in our home, it's always good to think about, well, what am I using now? Am I using a lot or a little for the value that I get from it? Because you might already be using energy efficiency, and then you might have less that you can do to make more of a difference. Alternatively, you might be using energy quite inefficiently and not even realize it, and then you have got a lot that you can do. It's always good to have a look at your bills, because as well as all the usual stuff on your bill, like, how much money you've been paying, what you owe and when, and the details of your plan and your retailer and the distribution network, the bill also shows, usually on the second page, your energy usage over the last several billing cycles. And this one sort of shows, the last several months. This is, I think, a 2 or 3 monthly cycle here. So it actually shows that, certain months you use more electricity, this is an electricity bill, than other months, less here, more there. That's a good indicator of what times of year do you use more. And that's usually dependent on your heating and cooling. The other useful thing in the bill is it looks at your daily usage, and your daily usage is always written somewhere. And that's a really good little benchmark figure for you to make rough calculations about how much is it going to cost me. It actually looks at your daily usage and compares it with typical households of different sizes in your area. This is from this big project that the Australian Energy Regulator has done, where they've looked at typical households in all different areas of Australia and sort of worked out what's the usual sort of energy usage for those households. Again, we're all different. We all use energy differently. Our houses are different. Our appliances are different. It's a rough guide, but it's a good indication. If your daily usage is heaps higher than what this shows for the same number of people, then that sort of suggests you've got some opportunities maybe to save some energy. If your daily usage is sort of on a par or lower than the number of people in your household, then maybe you've got a bit less opportunity to save and you're already doing pretty well. So that's sort of useful to know. And yeah, this bill comes from the Energy Made Easy website, which is a national government run website that does a few things. And one of the things it does is they have the information on this, what they call this energy benchmarking project. And you can actually go to their website. The URL is up there, but you can sort of Google it pretty easily. And you can actually put in your postcode, answer a few questions about your household, and then it will tell you how much other households like yours typically use for their electricity or gas in the same area. That's a really good, sort of more accurate than what's on the bill, a good indication of how am I doing compared to the average. The other thing that the Energy Made Easy site does is helps you choose retailers, but not for Victorians, because Victoria has its own energy comparison website called Victoria Energy Compare. This is a good place to go just to find if you can find a cheaper electricity or gas supplier. You put in a bit of information about your house. You can also connect it with your energy data from your smart meter. And it'll look at all energy plans and tell you, this one will cost you this much, this one will cost you that much. It'll rank them. It's great. I changed mine recently and found out that I'd been paying a lot more than I could have for electricity. The other thing that you can do right now with the Energy Compare website is there's this government grant called a power savings bonus. And if you just go to the Energy Compare website to use it, you can put in an application and they basically will pay you $250. That's a good saving on your energy bill. And that's a government program that's trying to encourage people to use this website. So, go for it, get your $250. I got mine and paid for a few months of my electricity. So I was pretty happy. That's sort of the quick thing on energy usage, finding out retailers and your usage. So I'll now go on to thermal performance and how your house operates as a machine for keeping heat in during winter. And this diagram is based on a typical weatherboard house, which is actually pretty typical in Victoria, of where the heat inside your house gets out. Because basically, you put heat into your house with your heaters, heating system, whatever, and the heat tries to get out of your house whichever way it can. That's why we have ceiling insulation and curtains on windows and all that to try to stop that. Some houses let heat out really easily. You'll know if you're in one of those because you'll run the heater, you'll be warm. As soon as you turn the heater off, you get cold. If your house is well insulated and sort of prevents a lot of this heat from escaping, the house will stay warmer for a lot longer. Ceiling insulation is absolutely the most bang for buck in terms of how much you spend to get the most benefit from keeping heat in, because heat goes off in all directions, but it likes to rise most of all. So if you've insulated your ceiling, then you will keep a lot of the heat in. The other ways the heat gets out, out through the windows, out through the walls, out through gaps in the building material of your home, and down through the floor. So there's all sorts of ways. And we really focus on ceilings and windows because they're the areas where the most heat gets out. I know in this diagram, it says windows is a bit less than walls, but when you think about how much of your house is wall and how little is windows, the windows do the heavy lifting in terms of stealing the heat from your house compared to the walls. So yeah, that's why we focus on walls, on windows and insulation most of all. But if you've got opportunities to do stuff with your walls and other stuff, that's always good too. Insulation is usually pretty cheap and easy to install, but it's more difficult in some types of roofs, especially flat roofs. So if you don't have a traditional sort of, peaked roof with a ceiling space, you might need to do a bit more work to find an installer who can give you some good info about how best to insulate it. Little deviation into star ratings. If you're doing a major renovation or buying a new home, it will have to have a NatHERS star rating. This is a national system for rating the energy performance of houses based on the design specifications. The current standard for the last 10 years has been 6 stars, and recent changes to the building code are introducing a 7-star standard. A typical existing home is sort of maybe about 3 stars. A home built in the last 20 years will usually be at least sort of 5 stars, though there is a bit of a thing where some houses actually perform lower than they're supposed to. But the main purpose of this chart is just to show how much more energy, this chart graph is energy, that's how much more energy you need to keep a 3-star home warm than a 6 or 7-star. And, a 5-star is in between up about here. The star rating just reflects the ability of the house to keep the heat in. So this really shows, I think, that, if you do some work to make your house try and keep more heat in, you can save a lot of energy and a lot of money and still feel as warm, or probably warmer often, because more thermally performing houses keep the heat more stable inside. If you've got an old house, it's pretty hard to get an old house up to the 6 or 7-star standard, but it's not so difficult to get a lot of them a couple of star numbers ahead of where they are. And that makes a big difference. Every star increase makes a big difference with energy usage and cost of energy. There's also another type of star rating called the Residential Efficiency Scorecard that's specifically designed for assessing existing houses rather than the NatHERS system, which is based on plans and new houses. This was actually developed by the Victorian government, and there's this whole system where you can find, if you go to this website, thehomescorecard.gov.au, you can find a accredited residential efficiency scorecard auditor. They'll come to your house, they'll talk to you about how you use your energy. They assess the home, they look in the ceiling, they look at your walls and your appliances, and they basically put together this detailed report together. They give you advice as to what you can do to most effectively increase your comfort, reduce your energy costs, but they'll also give you this very detailed report that contains more information. And as part of this program, they're also building a bit of an information bank about the variation in, the performance of houses across the state, which is useful for looking at sort of policy issues. So I really do recommend, it costs a few $100s usually to get one of these audits. It's pretty worth it. You can save a lot of money, especially if you own a house and can make some substantial changes, like, with changing appliances or insulation. It can be quite worth it. I had one done in my house several years ago. I was renting, but they had a scheme where they did it for renters. And even though as a renter, I couldn't do that much to change my house, the audit still was really useful and helped me make some big changes just in how I use my appliances. And yeah, the residential efficiency scorecard is literally a scorecard where they rank your house on these different sort of areas and tell you how good it is. And then they, like I said, they tell you what you can do to make it better. So that's a good one to understand more about how your home performs. And that information can often help you just figure out, okay, if I've got a limited budget to upgrade my home to make it more efficient, what should I focus on most? What gives me the most value? Like I said, if you don't have good insulation already, ceiling insulation is usually the biggest bang for buck because you lose so much heat out of the ceiling. And there's a bit of information about insulation, like the R rating is just a system for measuring how thick the insulation is. R5 is sort of pretty typical recommendation for ceilings, and walls are about half that. A lot of houses have partial insulation in the ceiling, sometimes just because of bad insulation, sometimes because of things like downlights that can't be covered by insulation, so they have gaps around them. You've got to really be careful of gaps in your insulation, because even small gaps actually reduce the performance by quite a lot. And by the time you've got sort of 10% of your ceiling uninsulated, the insulation is only doing half the work that it could be doing. So that's good to know. And you know, one thing I did with that rental house where I got that inspection was I discovered that there was a bit of insulation missing, and I got a bit more put in and made a heap of difference, even though it was just a bit. So that's good to keep in mind. Wall insulation is much more difficult and expensive to retrofit in an existing house. If you're building a house, it's a no-brainer, and that's pretty much required by the regulations now. But yeah, it's not always cost effective in existing homes, which doesn't mean, you know, if you can afford it, it doesn't have to be cost effective, because it will make you more comfortable as well as save money, and that's worth money. So it's much easier in some houses than others, depends on the construction of your walls. But if you want to retrofit wall insulation, you really need to talk to an insulation specialist to find out what options are for your house, the way that it's built. Floor insulation is generally a bit of a lower priority because you lose much more through the walls and ceiling than through the floors. But it's often a bit easier to do than walls, and it does help. And if you've got timber floors that have gaps in them, or a big gap under the house where the wind blows, then floor insulation might be probably both easier to install and also more important. Some people go for super insulation at higher than like R5, like R6, R7, R8. The more you add, the more effective it is, but it starts to be less and less effective, just in terms of the improvement is smaller and smaller. So that's where, you know, R5 for ceilings, R2.5 for walls is pretty much about the sweet spot to aim for. Stuff that you put in after that is more expensive, but doesn't make that much of a difference. One important thing about insulation is, as some of you might remember from the insulation scheme 10 or so years ago, there are a few safety issues with insulation if it's not installed properly. A lot of people do insulation themselves. It's completely legal to do insulation yourself. It's not like electrical work where you have to be, you know, licensed. But there are some serious safety issues. So we really strongly recommend, if you want to DIY ceiling insulation, it's not really advised unless you've got experience doing it or working in roof spaces, or if you've had some training. The risks include, you know, dehydration, injury, electrocution, and actually house fires. And this photo is actually from a house that had insulation covering halogen downlights, which caught fire. And yes, all of those things have happened. That, you know, you might, if you remember the free insulation scheme, it was these incidents that sort of led to the end of the scheme, even though the rate of incidents was actually lower during the scheme than before it. But you know, the increase in insulation was so big that it was very noticeable. So just be really careful if you're doing that. Really recommend that you've got experience or training before you do it. And Sustainability Victoria on their website, and you can just Google this and find it. It's on Sustainability Victoria's website. Has good information about, you know, safety tips and that for installing insulation. Like I said, the other thing is windows. This picture is from a thermal camera, and as a quick aside, I understand that some of the libraries around the Western Suburbs councils have energy efficiency kits that you can borrow. I think Hobsons Bay might be one. I know that Maribyrnong has them too. So these kits have thermal cameras, as well as some other equipment that helps you find efficiency issues in your home. Thermal cameras are great because you point it at the house from inside or outside, and it shows where the heat or cold is getting in or out. This house has good insulation in the ceiling and walls, and the red bit is warmth coming out, and the green and blue is sort of coldness. And you can see that all this heat is coming out the windows, some around the eaves, and out the garage door. And these are like those weak spots in the house where heat gets out more easily. And this is a good example of why window coverings are so important for keeping the heat in. People might use double glazed windows as well. They're also very effective, but window coverings, like good thick curtains, are almost as effective as double glazing, but far, far, far cheaper in an existing home. If you're building a new house or a major extension renovation, double glazed windows are really worth it. They cost a bit more, but they perform so much better. But replacing existing windows with double glazing is just very expensive, and it takes about 60 years to pay back or something. So not so worth it financially. But yeah, good curtains or special blinds are pretty good for windows. The other, here's a little thing on windows. A window with curtains, thick curtains on it, loses nearly half as much heat loss as a window without curtains. And pelmets make it even better. You can also get these honeycomb or cellular blinds that sort of fit into the window frame that make a good seal, and they've got an air gap in them, so they insulate pretty well. I mentioned double glazing, not so cost effective as a retrofit, but certainly good if you're building or extending. And yeah, also look for gaps around the windows, around the window frames, like anywhere where a thing goes into the wall, there's going to be gaps, and filling gaps between panes of glass and between the window frames can really make a big difference. I just want to explain the importance of pelmets. Even when you've got good warm curtains, like here's like a good warm curtain and there's your window. When the air is heated in the room, the warm air, which as you know sort of rises, it actually travels along the ceiling and goes down in between the gap between the curtain and the window, races past the cold glass, which sucks all the heat out of it. And then the air does a full loop and comes back in under the curtains as a cold draft, making you colder, making your feet cold. The heat's leaving the room. So this is the one issue with curtains, is that this sort of circular air current sort of thing happens. And that's why pelmets are a thing. And, you know, some of you will have pelmets. You would have seen pelmets. They're just like a thing that goes over the top of the, like a little half box sort of thing that goes over the top of the curtain, down the side, across the top, across the front. And the pelmet stops that movement of air. So the air can't go down because it's covered. So a good pelmet that covers the whole top of the curtain basically stops that air movement and really makes the performance, improves performance by about another 25%. It makes such a big difference. Some people also put pelmets down the side. It helps a bit more, but the top is most important. And look, pelmets, where's my mouse gone? There it is. Pelmets come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them look a bit naff and some of them look quite nice. It depends how you do them. But even if you don't get proper pelmets installed, or even if you can't afford to do it yet, even sort of improvised pelmets like a bit of cardboard or core fluid or something across the top of the curtains that stretches from, like, and if you look back at the diagram, where's the diagram? Like, even if you just put a bit of cardboard or core fluid from the window frame reaching across to the top of the curtain, just anything to block that gap works very effectively. A lot of renters do this, put a little makeshift pelmet across to the curtain rod to stop that movement of air. The other thing you can do that's a bit DIY is what often gets called renter's double glazing, which is literally sticking bubble wrap on your windows. It works the same way as double glazing by creating an air gap between the glass and the room. And that's how all insulation works, is by putting that air gap to stop the transfer of heat. Doesn't look as beautiful as a beautiful double glazed window. This is actually a photo of my lounge room. That's not a particularly great view out the window, so I didn't really mind. I thought I'd try it out. It actually works really well. I used to sit on this couch and feel the cold air coming off the window, and with the bubble wrap, you just don't feel that. So it does make a difference, and that's something to try if you're looking for a budget solution or a temporary solution until you get more work done or something. That's also a good way to do it. You can get these sort of more expensive window films that are designed as a more permanent-ish sort of double glazing type thing, which is like a plastic film that you adhere to the window frames and then you shrink with a hairdryer. So there's a few options out there for what they call secondary glazing or double glazing. So it's always worth looking into. It does make a difference. Drafts is the other one. And basically anywhere where two surfaces in the structure of your house join together, there's potential for gaps. And where there are gaps, there can be drafts. And this diagram is a bit exhausting to look at because like everything is a draft, right? You vented skylights, outlets for your evaporative cooling, the gap between the wall and the ceiling or the wall and the floor, and the gaps around the window frames and between the panes of glass and underneath doors, around, you know, air conditioners or anything else that pokes out through the walls. Basically, gaps can be everywhere. I mean, houses need a bit of ventilation, so you don't want to completely remove all gaps, but most existing houses have way more gaps than are actually needed for proper ventilation. So dealing with these little drafts, they stop you feeling cold, because if you feel a cold draft blowing across the room, but they also do take the heat out of the air. So there's all sorts of things like, you know, door snakes for under doors, or you can get, you know, you can attach draft stoppers to the bottom of doors. There's all different types for different types of doors. You can, if you're not using a chimney, there's covers you can put out there, or things called chimney balloons that you inflate in the chimney to stop the air going out. For exhaust fans, you can get covers that have little flaps, and when the exhaust fan's running, the flaps open, but when the exhaust fan's not running, it closes again to stop it being a source of draft into the ceiling space. Or you can get exhaust fans attached with like ducts to take the exhaust air outside. If you've got these evaporative cooling system with vents in the roof, you can cover them up during winter so that the heat doesn't escape out through those vents. Some of them you can close the little louvers. People also sometimes put like a bit of cardboard or something over those outlets to block them up during winter. If you've got wooden floorboards, rugs really help with the gaps between the floorboards. You can also sort of seal the gaps. And yeah, there's a lot you can do with sealing gaps around skirting boards. Moving panes of windows, sometimes felt seals that you can stick on between the panes, still allow the window to open, but sort of make a nicer sort of seal. And like you'll see if you've got sliding doors, they'll have those felt seals, and you can do the same thing with windows. Basically, as many gaps that you can find and get rid of is usually good. A good way to find drafts is to walk around with bare feet, because you'll feel it on a cold day. Sometimes people use an incense stick or a candle and look at where the smoke is blowing to show the direction of the draft in the house. We feel low drafts more than high drafts. So that's something to keep in mind if you're sort of trying to prioritize. A lot of houses have these vents high up on the walls. Those vents are there for a reason. That's for, you know, houses built with the expectation that they'd have open fires or gas appliances like stoves and heaters. And those vents are to let the carbon monoxide out so that basically it doesn't affect you, because you can die from too much buildup of carbon monoxide in a house. So those vents are really important to have in a house. If your house doesn't have any gas appliances, no gas cooking, no gas heating, and no wood burning appliances, then it's okay to cover up those vents to prevent heat loss, but very seriously only if you don't have any gas appliances in the house, or wood burning, because they're very important for safety. And you would have heard of a couple of news stories of people dying from houses due to a buildup of carbon monoxide, and that's what these vents are designed to prevent. People sometimes ask, if I try to do my draft proofing, can I do too much? Can I make my house too tight? And yes, it's possible technically. There's actually a sweet spot. Like I said, you need ventilation. If your house is really leaky, it's drafty, and the heat escapes, and the heat gets in summer, and insects get in. If the house is too tight, it can cause mold and condensation and build up of carbon dioxide. It's actually pretty difficult to make a typical home so tight that you get these effects. Most of them are pretty leaky, and a lot of attention to blocking up drafts gets you to this sort of sweet spot where, yeah, it's still well ventilated, but you've got enough sort of ventilation that, you know, you still well ventilated, but you're stopping the drafts that are taking the heat away. So yeah, it's usually good just to try and do what you can to block up drafts. But yeah, just be careful if you are burning gas or wood to make sure that you leave the right amount of ventilation. And usually those high ceiling vents is a good way to do that. And draft stopping is significant. A good draft stopping in a house can reduce heat loss by about 20%. The other thing that's interesting with the thermal performance of the house is just what we call thermal mass, which is solid surfaces or materials that absorb heat. The classic thermal mass is like concrete slabs, if your house is built on a concrete slab, and like solid brick walls. We've all experienced, like, you know, a garden with a brick wall that the sun shines on, which sort of radiates heat and how is good for the plants. And, you know, some of you might experience, you know, a big window where the winter sun shines through and heats up the concrete floor and helps keep the house warm. This is really great for winter warmth, because it even works with if you're heating the house and it's got, say, brick walls, the heat will sort of soak into the bricks and sort of hang around and keep you warm. You know, there are heaters that used to be common called heat banks that were literally a bunch of bricks that got heated and then kept warm and slowly released the heat. The thing what you got to be careful with thermal mass is that in summer it can be a problem if you're taking too much heat from the sun when you're trying to keep the house cool. So, you know, if you're designing or, you know, changing your house, a good approach is to go, how can I get sun in the house during winter onto my thermal mass? And then in summer, how can I shade that same place so the sun doesn't come into my thermal mass in the summer? And, you know, so sometimes houses, you know, what they call passive solar houses are designed like that, often using, say, deciduous vines to give shade during summer and to allow sun in during winter. The right size eaves can work for that too, because the right size eaves on the side of the house will let the winter sun in, but will shade the summer sun because the summer sun's higher. So yeah, look, that's my very quick blurb about thermal performance. Any more questions you have, whack in the Q&A and we'll do that at the end. Because now I want to talk about heating, as this is how we put the heat into the house to let our thermal performance do the work. And basically we use, you know, we already mentioned you can let that winter sun in and warm up your concrete slab floor if you got one, but for most of us, we use a heating appliance to heat the house. And these are probably the most typical in Victoria. A lot of people don't realize that reverse cycle air conditioners are really efficient heaters, and they are the most efficient. These heaters here are basically in order of cost effectiveness of heating your home. Reverse cycle air cons are far and away the most efficient. In terms of technical efficiency, they're 400 to 600% efficiency. They put out 4 to 6 times as much heat energy as the electrical energy it takes to run them. Which sounds like it breaks the law of thermodynamics, but I'll explain that in the next slide, how that works. But basically, they're very efficient. They're the lowest cost to heat an area. They're also low emissions because they use so little electricity that the emissions from that electricity are less than the equivalent emissions from running a gas heater to the same level. So, you know, the modern all-electric homes are all about having reverse cycle air conditioners. They cool and they heat. In a house designed to have reverse cycle air conditioner heating, you'll have a few throughout the house, like a big one in, say, the living room, and smaller ones strategically around the house so that you can sort of heat the whole house. A lot of existing places might just have one that you've used as an air conditioner. That can still work pretty well for heating. And if you've got some money to invest in upgrading your heating, then adding 1 or 2 more reverse cycle air cons is really the most effective way of doing that. But look, a lot of us have gas heaters. Gas heating is particularly popular in Victoria, especially in large urban areas. And, you know, gas does work pretty well for heat. It's got more emissions than electricity for the amount that you need to make the same heat. And it does have the issue of, it does put sort of particulate pollution into the air in your home. Some modern gas heaters do that much less than some older ones, but it's still an issue and you still need to make sure they're well ventilated. Look, a lot of us have ducted heating, which, you know, vents in all the rooms, and some of us have, say, a single console heater in one room, or maybe a couple of them around. They basically work similarly. In fact, the console heater is a bit more efficient than ducted because you lose a lot of heat in the ducts, especially if it's an old system. The ducts can get worn, they can get holes in them, so the heat leaks out under the house. So certainly ducted heating does make houses feel very warm. It can be very expensive to do that. this is where these reverse cycle air conditioners can be a lot cheaper for the same effect, especially if your house is well insulated so that the air temperature equalizes through the home. If we don't have fixed heating, we might be stuck with some of these what we call resistive electric heaters, column heaters, or these radiators. They're a lot more expensive to run because it's not as effective at heating the room, because one, big enough to heat a whole room, you need a heap of electricity, which is very expensive. These heaters are most useful actually in the end for sort of heating your body. They're especially good in a house that's, say, not well insulated, where it takes too much energy to heat the room because so much heat escapes. In those cases, heating your body directly is more effective. And there's no mistake why those radiant type heaters are often used in bathrooms, where heating a wet body that's just stepped out of the shower is much more efficient in terms of feeling warm than blowing air around with a fan type heater, which makes you feel cold when you're wet. So look, if you're stuck with portable heaters, they do the job. Focus on heating yourself or a small room more than the whole house. You really need fixed heating to heat the rooms well. And like I said, the gold standard is really reverse cycle air conditioner. Yes, heating does well enough, costs more to run, and does cause more emissions. This is just an example of the cost. This is some modeling that we did a few years ago of the cost of heating this, of basically making the same amount of heat with a gas heater versus with a reverse cycle air conditioner. This is literally, at the end of the day, the cents per unit of heat energy created by the heater. And this is all about the way reverse cycle air conditioners make such great use of the electricity that is used to operate them. And this is basically how it works. And the shortcut answer is really a heat pump. It's called a heat pump. A heat pump is basically a fridge in reverse. It's the same technology used in fridges, but it's done backwards to make heat instead of to draw heat out. Basically, the electricity that runs the reverse cycle air conditioner doesn't actually produce the heat itself. It just runs a compressor and a fan that sucks in air from outside. And when it compresses it, it actually sucks all the heat out of the air and sends that heat to the internal unit that then blows the hot air into the room. You might think that cold air outside on a day like today doesn't have any heat in it, but that's not true. It does have heat in it. Just to sort of make the point, 2 degrees is pretty cold, right? But -6 degrees is a lot colder than 2 degrees, which just means that there's still some heat in that 2-degree air. It's just that we're not experiencing it as heat. So no matter how cold it is outside, there's enough heat in the air that the compressor can extract it out and send it to the heater and blow it into the room. Heat pumps, heaters are everywhere in cold countries like Scandinavian countries. So yeah, this is just to sort of, and this is how you multiply the electricity energy that goes in to make more heat come out. This is why they're so efficient and why they end up being such low emissions. So if you're buying a reverse cycle air conditioner, the most important thing is just get the right size for the room, because sometimes people's disappointment with a heater is because they bought the wrong size for the room. So find out the right size for the room, talk to the heating specialist about it. If you don't like the air blown from the heater, and some people don't like it, just run the fan on low speed. It still heats just as well. If your house is well insulated, then the air temperature does equalize through the room and through the whole house. Usually the ideal way to do it is to have a couple of them, like 2 or 3, depending on the size of your house, so that you can heat different areas in the air from all of them, sort of mixes together and makes a nice warm home. You can get heat pumps ducted, but the same issue with ducted gas heating, the ducts actually lose heat. If you're buying one, look for a high efficiency, like a high star rating. The appliances have their own star ratings. In almost all cases, the extra cost for a more efficient heater will save you more than that extra money in running costs over a few years. And yeah, look, the more expensive ones also have lower noise, which can be helpful if you're in a more congested, a more medium density sort of neighborhood area, because there are limitations on noise as to where you can install them. So the low noise ones will make everybody happy. But yeah, there's a lot on the market. They've come down a lot in price the last few years because they're so much more common So that's a bit of info about reverse cycle air conditioning. General tips for heating. If you've got, generally heating the rooms that you use and not the rooms that you don't use means that you're using less heat. It depends a bit on the type of heating. If you've got ducted heating, you need to sort of heat the whole house, because otherwise, if you close off too many rooms with ducted heating, the air can't circulate back to the intake area, and it actually causes a draft and makes the house colder. But if you don't have ducted heating, it's great to close off doors and windows and just heat the areas that you use. But balance that with, like I was talking to someone the other day, and it's like they've got reverse cycle air conditioners in the 2 rooms on either side of a hall, and then the hall gets cold. And it's like, well, in that case, if you want the hall to be warm, open the doors, let the hall get warm as well. So strategic use of doors and windows in the house helps to get the heat to spread around where you want it and not waste it where you don't want it. The thermostat, which controls whether it's ducted heating or whether it's a reverse cycle air conditioner, in which case the thermostat's, I think, usually work in the heater. Keep that out of drafts, because drafts can make the thermostat read falsely and overrun the heater. Speaking of the thermostat, as Belinda mentioned before, think about what level you set it at and balance what you wear with how hot the heater is, because every degree lower that the thermostat is saves you a lot of energy and a lot of money, more than you would think. There's something like, I think 10% each around the main heating temperatures, each difference in degree adds or subtracts about 10% from the energy used. So if you can put the thermostat 1 degree lower and wear 1 extra layer, you'll actually save a lot of money, and you've got more efficient heating. In bathrooms, we usually recommend that you avoid heaters that blow air around, because when you're wet, the air blowing on you makes you feel colder. Those in the ceiling heat lamps are actually pretty good for bathrooms. They look a bit scary if you look at their energy usage, because they're rated at 2,400 watts or something. But if you're just using them for 5 minutes, that's not actually a lot of energy use. It is if you accidentally leave them on. So that's the trick. Don't leave them on or you'll spend a fortune. But if you're running these for like 5 minutes while you're drying yourself, it's actually pretty efficient. It doesn't take much energy, and it's a better way to keep warm than a fan heater. These little strip radiators in bathrooms, similar principle, same thing. Point them at you so the heat goes directly on your body and you feel warm. If you've got ceiling fans, there's usually a winter setting where they run backwards and push the warm air back down from the ceiling, because hot air rises. It's always colder near the floor than the ceiling. Ceiling fans push the warm air back down to help equalize the warmth in the room. So they're good for winter. Use them on low speed so you don't get a draft, and they're particularly good for high ceilings. And yeah, we mentioned warm clothing before, and Belinda also mentioned that, especially if your house is not well insulated or you haven't got good heating. But even if you have, warming yourself is actually the most effective way to keep warm. You can get these electric throw rugs that are like an electric blanket that you can sort of put around you. They cost barely anything to run. They're great if you're sitting still when you tend to get colder. You can get heated floor pads, again, very low energy usage because they don't need to create much heat because you're touching them. If you're working at a home office during the day and you get cold, a low power radiant heating panel or fan heater can help keep you warm. If you use it sparingly, it doesn't cost too much. Warmer clothing always helps. And yeah, Belinda mentioned, natural fibers are generally pretty good. Wool is really great, but polar fleece also works pretty well. Some people like puffer jackets because they're light and warm, and something on your feet, especially because if there's any draft in your house, it's going to be coming along the floor somewhere. Also, for working at your desk, heated mouse mats. I've never used one, but I know a few people who swear by them. And hot water bottles and wheat bags are pretty popular. They are good. It's keeping a hot thing next to you. It's like having a dog or a cat, same thing. But just be mindful that there are some pretty safety issues with hot water bottles and wheat bags. And if you're not careful, they can actually cause pretty serious injuries. Hot water bottles that burst can cause serious burns. Wheat bags, if they're overheated, can actually spontaneously combust. So follow the instructions. It's definitely recommended that you change hot water bottles sort of annually, and also be very careful that you do the little cup up tight and that the washer is in good condition. And it's also recommended that you don't put boiling water in hot water bottles, but sort of heat the water to about 60, 70 degrees. So that's a quick rundown on personal heating. I'd go quickly onto hot water because, like I said, heating is the biggest use of energy, especially in winter in the house, but hot water comes in second. And we often think of water saving shower heads as saving water, but they also save energy because by using less water, you're also using less hot water, and that means you're using less energy to heat hot water. So definitely recommend water saving shower heads. Some of the cheap ones are fine. The more expensive ones usually feel a bit nicer and still save lots of water. You can often get these cheap ones for free from those people who come around door to door under the Victorian Energy Upgrade program. And look, they do pretty well. I've got these in my house. I'm pretty happy with them. Some people like to spend a bit big and get some more expensive ones that have a wider head and get more water, whatever you like. Shorter showers also, it's like turning a thermostat down. If you shorten your shower by 1 minute every day, you can save a lot of money per year in energy and in water costs. Aerators on taps that you screw onto the end of the tap, and they're sort of like water saving shower heads for taps, and they're good for taps where you use hot water a lot because they'll save energy as well. And most modern taps have the little thread. Some of them have an inside thread and some of them have an outside thread. Just find out which one you've got. You can buy these aerators for like $10 from Bunnings. Hot water pipes. When the hot water sits in your pipes, it slowly loses heat. We all know in the morning when you first turn on the hot water, it takes a while before it's hot, but then if you turn it on a bit later, it's still hot. That's because overnight the water in the hot water pipes went cold, and in the morning it stays hot because it's being used a lot more. Hot water pipes are supposed to be insulated, but some older houses don't have insulation on hot water pipes. You can actually do it yourself with any exposed pipes. You can buy this pipe insulation stuff from Bunnings and just put it on. I've done it myself in rental properties that had exposed uninsulated hot water pipes all around the backyard. If the pipes are in the walls, that's obviously you can't really do that. And it's been a standard for quite a while that hot water pipes should be insulated. So the most relatively modern places or places that have had a bit of work done in recent 20 or 30 years should have insulated pipes. But keep an eye out. If you can see uninsulated hot water pipes, insulate them. And often that'll be around the hot water system itself. In terms of the type of hot water system, look, a lot of us have gas, especially in Melbourne, either gas storage or gas instantaneous, which is where it heats up as you're using it. You can also get heat pump hot water systems, same technology they use in reverse cycle air conditioners. Similarly, they've got the same thing where they use electricity much more efficiently, and the cost of heating water with a heat pump hot water system is a lot less than even a gas instant hot water system, which is generally the most efficient type of gas hot water system. And that's, again, because of that heat pump multiplier effect. So yeah, there's a few different types of heat pump hot water systems. And if you're looking at going all electric, then the heat pump hot water system is really the way to go. They're a storage system. They either have the compressor separate like a reverse cycle air conditioner, or they might have it integrated with the tank. Again, people who complain about they didn't get enough hot water, they got the wrong size for their household. Get the right size one for your household. With the heat pump, because it's so cheap to run, it's a bit less of a big deal if you accidentally go a bit too big, because the extra energy to heat more water isn't actually very much with a heat pump because it's so efficient. Again, cheap brands are more likely to break down and be noisy. So if you can afford it, get a good quality one. The middle of the road sort of brands, the mid-price sort of ones are very good. Look for the, again, high star rating or coefficient of performance, which shows how efficient they are. The bigger the number, the better. The more efficient one, basically the less it costs to run. So you'll usually save any extra money that it might have cost you. And again, look, find a good installer. The thing with hot water systems is that often we replace hot water systems all of a sudden because our hot water system failed and we can't have a shower. That's actually the worst time to buy a hot water system, because you don't have time to sort of shop around and choose the one you want and wait till it's in stock on that. So if your hot water system is really old, it doesn't hurt to sort of have a plan in place, be ready to change it over, or even change it over when you know it's sort of at, getting close to the end of its life, rather than waiting for it to break down. I've had a lot of stories of people who really wanted to get a heat pump hot water system because they were trying to go all electric. The hot water system failed, the plumber came, and the plumber's like, I've got another gas one on the truck, I can put it in an hour, or I can order a heat pump and you'll have to wait a week and a half. Those people ended up getting another gas pump when they didn't really want it because they didn't want to go without hot water for all that time. So plan for hot water replacement and you'll get the one that you want. A lot of people have solar hot water, solar collectors on the roof, and either a tank on the roof or on the ground. Look, they work pretty well too. Heat pumps actually use less electricity in Melbourne's climate than solar, because even though the solar heats up for free a lot, in our colder climate, you need to boost them a lot with either gas or electricity. So heat pumps actually work. They're very competitive with solar hot water systems, and the good ones will be a bit cheaper to run. They're still a bit expensive to buy though. I think the prices will be coming down in the next few years, but they're still a good investment. We're nearly done here. I'd want to leave enough time for questions, so I'll go quickly through a couple of the other main things that we can do. And one, which I'm not really going to talk about at all, apart from show this picture, is solar panels are one of the best ways you can reduce your energy expenditure and emissions of your house. Generating renewable energy on your roof is the easiest way to reduce your, to reduce your bills and your emissions. Systems are relatively cheap. There's a lot of government grants at the moment to make them even cheaper. And even though the amount that you get for exporting to the grid is pretty low, the value you get from using energy directly is very high and will only get higher as electricity prices go up. So if you can afford solar and you've got space to put it, that's fantastic. It really helps. It doesn't make you more efficient, but it certainly lowers your costs. Quick thing on lighting. Look, there's been a big change in lighting technology over the last 20 years. As you know, we had incandescent bulbs, and then suddenly it was compact fluoros, and now it's LEDs. This little chart just shows the relative energy usage of the different types of light globe for the same lighting output. We know a lot of us are used to talking about the strength of light in terms of watts based on incandescent bulbs, but the proper measure is lumens. And so your 60-watt bulb is what, 700 lumens, and that's a 10-watt LED does the same light as a 60-watt bulb. And the watts, that's how much electricity it uses. So LEDs are by far the most efficient. They use between 10% and 33% less energy than, say, than a compact fluoro. Much less than an incandescent, but we probably don't have many incandescents left in our homes anymore. But yeah, even compared to compact fluoro, LEDs use a lot less. They run cooler, they last longer, and they're available in different types of light, like warm white, sort of white. So they're pretty good. Again, the Victoria Energy Upgrades program I mentioned, people come to your door offering to do stuff for free. They do LED lights. I had my place done. It was great. And LED lights, they last for ages. Like the incandescent lights lasted typically for 1,000 hours. Halogen bulbs about twice that. Compact fluoros 8,000 hours, but LEDs last up to 50,000. Not if you get the super cheap ones. Again, the really cheap ones are a bit crap, but get a decent quality one, and they'll last like probably longer than you're in the house for. So yeah, LED is definitely the way to go. With halogens, this shows a regular glow, but a lot of houses have downlights, halogen downlights. They actually end up costing a lot to run, even though they're relatively low power use compared to, say, incandescent. Usually you have a whole lot in the house, and they often overlight the house as well, and they run very hot and they use a lot of electricity. And they can't be covered by insulation. So it makes all these gaps in your insulation that lets heat get out. So under the Victorian Energy Upgrades program that the state government runs, you can actually get halogen downlights changed for LED downlights, or you can do it yourself, or as in not do it yourself, but get an electrician to do it for you, not on the program, either way. If you do that, it is recommended if you've got downlights and you like them and you want to keep them, LEDs will cost you a lot less to run. And if you get the right type, they can also be covered by insulation to make your installation more effective. So there's a little thing here. You can Google this. I just got this data by Googling it, but like if they're rated IC or ICF, they can actually be completely covered by insulation. If they're rated CA, the insulation can go right up to them, but just not over them. And if they're rated non-IC, you have to have like 10 centimeters around them. So that's where you get the gap in insulation. So that's, if you are getting LEDs to replace halogen downlights, absolutely get ones. I'd recommend getting ones that can be covered by insulation, because you'll save on your heating bills when you can do that. Just as a little example of the cost, and lighting is not a huge cost driver in our homes, but it does all add up, especially if you've got a large home and lots of lights. I did a quick calculation here of one 60-watt bulb, 700, like 60-watt incandescent bulb, the old-fashioned type of globe, 700 lumens, 4 hours a day for a year. One bulb of the old school incandescent bulbs cost $20, and the bulb basically lasts for the year. A halogen costs $15, but you get a globe every 2 years. By the time you get down to LED, it's costing you like $3.50 a year, and they should last for 30 years if you get a good quality one. That's a huge, if you multiply that by the number of lights in your home, that's actually significant money saving, not just in the energy saving, but in the how often you have to replace a globe. So think about lighting. It's small but important. And look, the last thing about appliances really is any appliances you get, look for higher energy ratings. That'll use less electricity and it'll save you money. It's especially important for fridges. Fridges are one of the higher energy using appliances in our homes. And old fridges, even if you get the seals replaced, because the seals do worn out and then you lose, they can become less efficient. But even if you get the seals replaced, old fridges, just because of the way the technology has changed since they were built, are a lot less efficient. So get a high efficiency, good star rating on fridges and other major appliances, and the money that you save is almost always worth it. This chart just shows a lot of typical appliances. The blue one is like an old appliance. The orange one is like a typical new appliance, and the gray one is the highest efficiency new appliances. And you can see that while heating and cooling and hot water are the real ones where there's a big difference, with all the appliances, there's a significant difference between the old one, the new typical one, and the new best one. Like, the most efficient fridges available now use half the energy as the typical fridges built now, and like a quarter of the energy of old fridges. That can really add up. Pool pumps, again, like get the most efficient ones. Variable speed is good. The closer possible to the pool makes them more efficient because you lose energy with distance. Pool pumps, I don't actually know much about pool pumps, but they're a big usage of electricity. So if you've got a pool and you're looking at upgrading your pool pump, I'd like to talk to an expert on pool pumps to find out what's the most energy efficient, both in terms of the pump to get and the way to operate it, because you don't need to run them all the time necessarily. A lot of people with solar time their pool pumps just to run while their solar is generating. A lot of modern appliances with remote controls have standby power. Some of them, new ones, there's standards now for standby power. So new ones shouldn't use very much when on standby, but some older ones can use a lot. Those and energy efficiency kits you can borrow from some libraries will have a power meter, and you can actually measure the standby usage of appliances. I did that to my sound system a few years ago and discovered that it used a heap when it was on standby. So I got into the habit of turning off when I wasn't using it, and that made a big difference. So all these little things, they just add up. That's pretty much it. If you're a bit skeptical about the whole reverse cycle air conditioner thing, just try it. If you've got one, try using it instead of your gas heater next time that's cold. See how it goes. Compare the difference. Compare what happens with your bill. If it's a relatively modern aircon, you'll find that you'll save money, and if you work out how to run it right, the right temperature, the right fan speed, it'll keep you warm. And look, just a quick list of a couple of resources. I mentioned the Victorian Energy Upgrade Program. Not only do they do like free shower heads and LED lights, but they also have big rebates for major appliances like hot water systems and heating that's more efficient. So worth checking out. Google Victorian Energy Upgrades or go to that website. I mentioned the residential efficiency scorecard assessments, the 250 power bonus. Sustainability Victoria has good information on efficiency, and especially on if you're looking at going all electric with your home. So have a look at their resources, really useful. There's also the Your Home website, yourhome.gov.au, which is a national website with lots of information about making your home more efficient. Good information there. Renew is putting together a Getting Off Gas toolkit, and they've got lots more information about efficient electrical appliances. That's worth checking out. And of course, there's also the solar homes program that the big government runs, which is big rebates on not only solar panels, but also hot water systems and batteries. So all worth checking out. And I'm sure that these resources will be shared around. Thank you for listening. Let's go into the Q&A, because that's always the most interesting part of the session. And stop share. There we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Lots of amazing information in there. I love it. Have got a few questions in the Q&A. If, as you're just to the attendees, please do put your questions in the Q&A. I will check the chat as much as I can as well, but it's more likely to get missed if your question goes into the chat. So please put it in the Q&A if you can. If you've already put it in the chat, please drop it into the Q&A. Okay, so we've got a few, I'll group the questions. We've got some questions there about windows. Just wondering, you did speak about really good window dressings, Dean. What do you know about the efficiency of the honeycomb blinds? Are they better than the thermal lined curtains? What are your thoughts on that one?
I'm actually not 100% sure, because that's not my particular area of expertise. I know that the honeycomb blinds are very efficient. When you get them to fit into, if they fit into the window frames, that's generally more efficient than curtains, which still have movement and the air gap. So I would probably talk to a window covering specialist about that. But my instinct would be that they're probably more efficient than thermal curtains, because of the way they can seal down the sides, and because, it's actually the air gap that creates the value more so than the thickness of material, say. But yeah, but certainly thermal curtains and honeycomb blinds are both very effective. But I think honeycomb blinds probably have the edge a bit, but yeah, I would double check that with someone who's an expert in window coverings.
Thank you. And just on pelmets, Jennifer is asking, do pelmets have an adverse impact in summer? When it's getting really hot inside, will they mean that the home heats up more?
Not really, because the same sort of thing happens when it's summer. If you've got the curtains closed to keep the sun out, the glass is hot, and air in your house going past the glass will bring heat in. So heat always goes to the cooler place. So no, pelmets work both ways. They're probably more effective. They do more in winter than in summer, because that particular air circulation thing is particularly noticeable when it's cold outside. But they don't make it any worse in summer at all. No, it's the same thing. If you can protect the cold glass and being exposed to the inside of your home, or the hot glass and being exposed to the inside of your home, then there's less heat transfer. Of course, the thing with windows in summer is the most effective thing for windows in summer is actually shading on the outside to stop the sun hitting the windows at all. That's, in winter, curtains keep the heat in the room. In summer, shading on the outside keeps the sun off the window. So they're the most effective strategies for windows, whether it's, a eave type shading, or a blind or shade cloth, or a deciduous vine or something. Yeah, the gold standard is keep the sun off the window in the first place. But yeah, no, pelmets don't make it any worse.
Thank you. And there is a energy efficiency in summer webinar coming up later in the year. I'll run through those, so we'll learn about things like that. Okay, so let's move on to the insulation related questions. I have one here. Someone is saying they have ceiling insulation, but the roof does not have sarking. Does sarking on the roof make a big difference to the energy efficiency?
Yes, sarking helps, because it's another layer between the roof and, sarking is probably more effective in terms of when it's hot, because again, the barrier between the hot bit and the not hot bit is the most important part. In winter, that's the ceiling. In summer, it's the sarking, because that helps to keep the roof space cooler. That's not to say that, insulation bats are not effective in summer. They are. Insulation bats are very effective because they're thick and they've got all those air gaps. And it actually doesn't matter how hot the roof space is if you've got good insulation on the ceiling. But sarking certainly helps, especially if you're in a really hot climate, or say metal roofs that tend to get hotter. So yeah, they're both effective. It all adds up together. But yeah, sarking is more effective in terms of keeping the sun out, because in winter you were trying to keep the heat in the living part of the house. Once you go above the ceiling, it doesn't matter so much. Yeah. So yeah, sarking less important for winter than for summer. But of course, the house goes through both seasons, so sarking is still very important.
So
Yeah.
similar to the windows, you're thinking about letting
Yeah.
heat, or keeping heat in or keeping heat out. Yeah.
That's right. It's good sometimes to remember that scientifically there's no such thing as cold, there's only heat. And there's either heat or absence of heat. And heat always goes to where there's less heat. So that's always what we're trying to do when we're insulating a house, is to keep the heat where we want it, whether it's outside or inside.
Thank you. A question about an uninsulated garage connected to the house with an internal brick wall.
Yep.
So should this person add insulation to the adjoining brick wall and door, or insulate the garage ceiling or walls?
Good question. And the answer is it depends. Like, for one thing, it can be more difficult to insulate the wall, especially if it's already built. I mean, insulating the garage, a good way to think about a lot of these insulation questions is, what is this thermal envelope? The thermal envelope is, what's the part of the building that I'm trying to keep at a comfortable temperature? And you can either include the garage or exclude the garage from that thermal envelope. If you exclude it and go, the garage can be cold and hot, that's when you've got to insulate the wall between the house and the garage, and especially the door, if there's a door. And often between house and garage is just a regular internal door. And that's when you might go, let's have a good solid door with a draft stopper and everything like that. But then alternatively, you might want to bring the garage into the thermal envelope, in which case you don't need to worry so much about the wall and door between, but then you want to insulate the ceiling in the garage and probably want to pay some attention to the garage door, which is often a weak spot. So it really depends on what you're trying to do, but also on what's easiest to do. And for a lot of people, it might be easier to try and insulate between the garage and the house. Let the garage be what it is. I mean, you want some good, like, draft and air gap protection between the garage and the house anyway, because of, you know, exhaust from cars and that sort of stuff getting into the house. So yeah, but yeah, it is a worthwhile strategy to decide to insulate the garage as well, especially if you use the garage for more than just parking your car in. If you've got a workshop or something in there, or, you know, kids use it to play table tennis, then that's when you might want to think about bringing the garage into the thermal envelope as well.
Very interesting. Okay, and before we move on to more heating related questions, I have a question about, how do you fix the bubble wrap to your window?
Yeah, I forgot to say that.
This person tried spraying it with water, but it eventually just fell off.
Yes, I sprayed it with water and it sticks for a while, and sometimes it starts to fall off, so I spray a bit more water. That's the easiest way. You could probably use some sort of adhesive, but then it might be more permanent, which might be fine, but I don't know how long the bubble wrap lasts. I've only had mine for a couple of years. So I think water is the general way. You could use some like double-sided adhesive, and maybe one way to do it would be to, you know, use the water, but then use some double-sided adhesive in the corners or something. I'm not sure. I found the water was fine, and every so often I've just got to spray a bit more water and stick it back on. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's move into heating related questions, heating and cooling. Julie, you've asked a question about something being more efficient than gas ducted. If you could just clarify in the Q&A, because I'm not sure what Dean was talking about at that time. If you could just put some clarification, rewrite your question with what you're asking, the comparison between. Okay, so I have a question here of, is there such a thing as a reverse cycle system that can retrofit onto an existing ducted system?
Right, so I'm assuming existing ducted gas, say, and you want to put a reverse cycle. Good question. It's a bit complicated. Yes, it is possible. You can use, because you can get ducted heat pump systems. They can use the same. I'm pretty sure they can usually use the same ducts as a gas system. And yes, they can be reverse cycle. I know that people often talk about this with hydronic systems, because some people have those hydronic heating systems that use gas furnaces to heat water that then circulates through radiators or coils in the floor. And I know it's complicated and not always possible to retrofit a heat pump to a hydronic system, because it needs different sized pipes, because the water gets heated to a different temperature. But heat pump is more about heating the air. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that a heat pump can be connected to existing ducts and be ducted. I will talk to a heating specialist about that. The things to keep in mind are that you do lose efficiency by going through the ducts, especially if the ducts are old. And it's usually recommended if you're upgrading a ducted heating system to get the ducts inspected and repaired or replaced if necessary, which does add to the cost. And also the size of the heat pump, when the heat pumps get really big, they get a bit less efficient as well. So this is why, it's one of the reasons why we say, look, ducted heat pumps are not generally as efficient as split systems, because the larger heat pumps are less efficient and there's losses in the ducting. And ducted systems themselves are inherently less efficient because you're always heating all the house, even if you don't need to. And anyone who's lived for a long time with a ducted system, especially if the house is well insulated, will often find it a bit tricky to find the exact right level to keep the house warm without getting too hot and without getting too cold, because you know that's one of the challenges of whole of home heating. But yeah, sorry, I've gone on a bit, but I'm pretty sure that you can replace gas ducted with heat pump. Yeah, you'd want to make sure the ducts are okay, and you want to talk to the heating specialist to find the right size for your system. Yeah.
Thanks, Dean. And this is another question about efficiency as well. Are the floor-mounted split systems less efficient than the wall-mounted ones?
Not necessarily. Again, all the split systems come in at different levels of efficiency, which you can see in the star rating, or if you look at on the spec sheet, there's a thing called COP, coefficient of performance, and that's literally the multiplier effect that heater has, like, you know, how many more times energy do you get out than energy in. I don't think the floor mounted ones are generally less efficient. I think they're a bit more expensive, only because they're not as common. I think they're a good solution for heating. Like I'm a renter, if I owned a house, I think I'd go for a floor mounted one, because it's sort of nicer to have the heat more at the, you know, lower level rather than the high level. Of course, the disadvantages are they take up that wall space. And yeah, there's less choice because the high mounted ones are much more popular, especially in Australia, where they've traditionally been sold as air conditioners for cooling rather than as heaters, even though they can usually heat. So, but yeah, you might just have to look a bit harder to find the the console ones at the efficiency that you're looking for.
Thank you. This is a question about overriding the minimum temperature on your reverse cycle air conditioner. So this person wants to put their thermostat to lower than 18 degrees for heat. Can they override the minimum default? I imagine that might be dependent on the unit itself.
Yeah, I think it does depend on the unit itself, pretty much. Yeah, the unit is designed to operate in the range that it operates in, and that's what you're sort of stuck with.
And you can find most instruction manuals for most appliances appear to be online now. So do a Google search of your appliance and see if the manual's uploaded there, yeah. And have a look for the instructions there.
I mean, it should be noted, if you're running a air conditioner as a heater at 18 degrees, that's running pretty efficiently. Like I said, you know, every degree that you go up is about, you know, 10% more energy usage. So given that people typically run them between 20 and 23, if you're running on 18, you're already being pretty efficient. But yeah, if your house is overheating, then that's an issue. And that probably means your house is really well insulated, or maybe that your reverse cycle electricity is big for the space. So one thing you can do with that is open up a couple of doors, heat more of the house with it, you know, still running efficiently. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, is it worth leaving the heating on when I leave the house during the day?
This is a big debate about this, and we at Renew, we did some analysis because some people were like, I've got my reverse cycle air conditioners, I set the temperature and I just leave it on for all of winter, and that keeps the house at temperature. And their belief was that that was more efficient to maintain the temperature than to let the house cool down and then to warm it up again. And we did some modeling of this, and basically it's not true. It's more efficient to turn it on when you need it and turn it off when you don't. It doesn't take that long to get up to temperature. If your house is well insulated, it doesn't lose very much either. I know the house that I'm in, like I said, I'm in a rental house. It hasn't even got complete ceiling insulation, but it's almost complete. I've got gas ducted heating, but I certainly find if I, you know, go out for the day, my house really only drops 3 or 4 degrees tops over a day, even when it's quite cold. I think that's quite remarkable for a house that's not particularly efficient, but has good ceiling insulation. So this is why we always go, get your insulation right, and then everything works better. People would sometimes ask us, I've got a really inefficient heater and I've got no insulation. What should I do first? And we always go, insulation. Running a terribly inefficient heater in a well-insulated house is still way cheaper than running an efficient heater in a badly insulated house.
Great point.
So yeah, but basically we did do the modeling on that question, and it's definitely not cheaper or less energy to run it all the time. Just run it when you need it.
Thank you. And what is the best setting on a split system? Is that the auto or heat on low fan?
Good question. It sort of depends on the systems. Auto basically uses its thermostat to decide, do you want me to heat or cool? I think most people just use the heat setting when it's cold, and the cool setting when it's hot. The low fan is good because you use a bit less electricity, you get less draft, but it still works well. Again, if your house is well insulated. If your house is poorly insulated, you'll probably need to run the fan higher to keep the heat going, and you'll need to run the fan high to warm up quickly when you turn on when it's cold. But a well insulated house, heat setting low fan is great. The auto setting generally works pretty well as well. So yeah, yeah, it probably depends on the appliance as to which one is better, but I think for most of them it's like they're both as effective as each other. The auto setting just means that you don't have to turn it to cool in, November.
Okay. This is a question about slab heating. Is it worth installing with polished concrete?
Interesting question. There's a few different types of slab heating. It could be hydronic, which is usually run by a gas boiler, or it could be resistive electric, which is often run on a controlled load, like an overnight rate. It also heats in the afternoon. They're the two main types. Look, a lot of people like slab heating because the warmth underfoot is really pleasant. It does tend to be expensive to run, whether it's hydronic or resistive electric. It's pretty expensive to run. Heat pump hydronic, probably a bit less expensive, but they're very expensive to buy, the heat pump hydronic systems. One of the issues that people do find with slab heating systems, though, is that you can't really sort of turn it off and on when you need it. It takes a while to build up temperature, and then the temperature stays because you're using the thermal mass. It's actually really good in really cold climates. Melbourne is not really as cold a climate as is ideal for slab type heating generally. Same as hydronic. People with hydronic heating, and hydronic can be slab or radiators, often find they need to open windows in the middle of winter to let the heat out because the house gets too hot when there's a mild winter day. And that's the sort of poor use of energy. It can sort of feel nice because you get nice ventilation, but in terms of cost, it's not the most cost-effective way. Look, a lot of people love hydronic and slab because they love the warmth and they're happy to pay the extra cost for it. And, that's the choice that you make. The electricity grid's getting cleaner and cleaner by the year. So if you're worried about emissions, that's getting better with electricity. And, it won't be long before it doesn't matter how much electricity we use. It's not really causing emissions problem. Like, even by 2030, the emissions in the electricity grid will be so low that that efficiency will be less important for emissions reduction than it is now. So yeah, that's sort of my thoughts. And the work that we've done on slab heating and hydronic is that probably a bit overkill for Melbourne's sort of climate, but if you like it, you like it, and that's fine.
And just replacing, this is moving to fridges, on replacing old fridges. What would you consider to be a really inefficient fridge? How many years older fridge would be what you consider to be an inefficient one?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. It's a little hard to answer. Like, certainly anything made before we had the Energy Star ratings on fridges is probably very efficient because there were no standards. I think we've had those Energy Star ratings for probably close to the last 20 years. I would normally go, maybe the technology's changed a lot. I would normally go, if it's older than 10 years, it's probably maybe 15 years. Okay. A 15-year-old fridge could be only a bit efficient or very efficient because there was quite a range. In fact, when I think about it, I bought my fridge about 15 years ago and I got the most efficient one I could get, and it's still very cheap to run. But when I was choosing, I could have got one that would have cost me 3 times as much to run, and that was still for sale, and it still had a star rating. It was just lower. So if they're getting that old, it may or may not be. You can look up the model numbers and see what their efficiency rating is. Modern fridges, last 5 years, probably even the least efficient ones are pretty good, because the standards have increased. The star rating system includes standards as well as rating. And yeah, anything pre, like I think my last fridge was like a 90s run, and like that was terribly inefficient. I worked out, I used a power meter, worked out it was costing me like $300 or $400 a year to run. No one wants that. So yeah, probably last sort of 5 to 10 years, you're pretty safe, though keep in mind that the lowest standard for efficiency is a lot lower than the higher standards. So it's always good to find out what the efficiency rating of it was. And that's an indicator.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Okay, so we've got one final question here. It's actually about doors, and whether, in terms of doors going to the outside, can you get a door that is pretty close to airtight?
Yeah, you can actually, and some newer houses do have them. Sometimes they have the doors are built with seals in the frame so that they close really tightly. And you can often tell these doors, if you go into a new sort of places, when you close it, there's a little bit of extra effort to close at the last bit because of the air pressure. So you can actually do that, and the draft stoppers on the bottom of the doors get quite good as well. So a lot of modern doors, they have a frame that goes all the way around, including on the bottom, and it closes very tightly all around with like a little rubber or felt seal. But even existing doors, you can do a lot with, I think those little spring-loaded flap sort of draft stoppers you might have seen, they sort of pop up. And when you close the door, they pop down. They've got a rubber thing. They're really good for, slightly uneven steps. And if you have that in conjunction with like very thin felt seals around the frame where the door goes in, that can go pretty well. I had those Victorian Energy Upgrade people come to my house a while ago and put seals around my door. And my house is very sort of crooked, and I was surprised with how airtight they got the door, because I can feel it when I push the door now. That it's not quite like the fully airtight, but I can feel that, yeah, it's actually doing pretty well. And I can stand around the door and it's like there's no draft coming through anymore. So even with an old door, with the right, and there's so many variations for the types of draft sealing that you get for doors. There's little rubber ones, and there's little felt ones, and then you can get brushes on the bottom, and you can get the flappy ones, and rubber ones. It really depends on what your sort of floor is. It can be actually tricky figuring out the right one if you're not particularly handy. So yeah, it's good to get some good advice on what's the best type for your door.
Marvellous. Thank you, Dean. Okay, so that's about us. We've got 3 minutes to go, so I'll just wrap up here. Thank you very much, Dean, for a wonderfully informative webinar. I geek out on all this stuff on how to save power, how to save money, how to save gas. It's really exciting to think of all the small changes that we can make that can really make a massive difference to our bills and to our comfort as well, of course. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, everyone, for coming along and joining us on this chilly Saturday morning. Just to let you know, this is part of a program of webinars, and there will be many more coming up. We've got EVs in July, which is always really popular and extremely interesting. In August, we'll have solar and batteries. In October, we'll be talking about all electric homes, which Dean has touched on today, electrifying everything within your home. In November, we'll talk about summer energy efficiency, which of course will bring up some of these things like how to keep your home cool over summer, how to stop the heat hitting the glazing, all those sorts of things that Dean touched on a little bit. And then in December, we'll do solar and batteries again, always a very popular topic. So we'll run that again in December. So just to finally wrap up, and for any Hobsons Bay City Council residents who are here today, thank you very much for attending. You can head to the Hobsons Bay website to find out more information about sustainability initiatives, and I've just put the link in the chat. And anyone from any other municipality, your council will also have a page of sustainability initiatives devoted to sustainability. There'll be information there on what your council is doing to mitigate climate change, reduce emissions, support our communities as we move forward, and to support us as we adapt to climate change, basically, and the impacts of climate change. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for all the great feedback in the chat. Thank you for your questions. Actually, and just we do have 1 more minute to go. Wanted to draw attention to the fact that someone in the chat put the green electricity guide as a Dean. That's a wonderful resource, isn't it? We have got a minute we could talk about it.
Yeah, look, people often ask, oh, what's the best energy retailer to go with for, better environmental performance? And it's a slightly tricky question, but the Green Electricity Guide does the hard work for you. They've looked into all the major energy retailers. They've looked at all aspects of their environmental performance, including where they get their electricity from and what sort of electricity power stations they own, but also how they've been in terms of contributing to policy that favors that, helps support renewable energy and helps support emissions reduction. So yeah, it's a really good resource. It's done by Greenpeace. And yeah, I always recommend it in our webinar that we do on, how to choose electricity suppliers. It's like, that's the one to go for if you're trying to find out who's got best bang for buck in terms of what they do to support the environment. So highly recommended.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dean. And just very quickly, I don't believe Hobsons Bay City Council has the energy efficiency kits at our libraries, but I know that many other municipalities do. It's a really good point, and I will look into whether we can, whether that can happen in Hobsons Bay as well. I will investigate that. If we ever do have them available, that will be on the sustainability page of our website. So thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar. See you all next time.